Alright, good morning, afternoon, and or evening, ladies and gentlemen, and we are finally here, the third and final part of the '04 Championship Series. I am so sorry this took so long. The week leading up to Thanksgiving at work was super busy, and I just was pulling all these crazy long shifts, and I was dead tired every time I got home. So, without further ado, roll the intro. I don't really have a good intro right now, but on this channel I like to talk sports. From the very beginning, Detroit was portrayed as massive underdogs. Detroit had made their first finals since 1991, however, they were still going up against, the Lakers that had frickin' three-peated. And not only that, they had gained the services of Gary Payton and Karl Malone, two wily veterans who were still working for their first rings, and who had both come up big in the playoffs, especially Karl Malone. That kind of pains me to say, but moving on. The Pistons were also just simply less fun to watch. Good old-fashioned defensive grinding basketball versus the high-flying, high-scoring Lakers. Simple as that. The casual fan would probably be more attracted to the purple and gold. The first game of the finals would take place on June 6, 2004. And it would go to Detroit, which was already a massive upset. They would win by a final score of 87-75. Despite the fact that Shaq put up 34 points and 11 rebounds, Karl Malone had 11 rebounds, and Kobe had 25 points. Kobe, however, was 10 for 27 from the field and 1 for 6 from 3. And we are definitely going to be getting into that later. In Game 2, LA would win in overtime, 99-91. This would be one of the finest performances of Kobe Bryant's storied NBA career. He would hit a three-pointer with 2 seconds left on the clock to tie the game, and he forced overtime in the first place. He had 4 points and 2 assists in the overtime, but that's not what people talk about for good reason. Kobe's 33 points led the team, and the Lakers came away with the dub by 8 points. Then, Game 3. Kobe would follow up that heroic performance with an absolute goose egg. The Pistons would win 88-68, while Kobe only had 11 points on 4 for 13 shooting. In fact, this was a night when the entire Lakers roster was just locked up. Their leading scorer would be Shaq, who had a measly 14 points that game. However, Game 4 would see Shaq dominate once more, 36 points and 20 rebounds. Kobe himself would have 20 points as well, but on another very bad shooting night, 8 for 25 from the field. However, the Pistons would still win that game, 88-80. Rasheed Wallace would drop 26, and however, more importantly for the outcome of the series, this is where Karl Malone would re-aggravate a knee injury that had been bugging him for the entire playoff run, forcing him to sit out of Game 5. Game 5 would also end the series. The Pistons would win another dominant victory, 100-87. Kobe would still score 24 that night, but on another bad shooting night, 7 for 21 from the field. As the final seconds ticked off the clock, one champion stood, the king of the 03-04 NBA season, the Detroit Pistons, a ragtag band of misfits from the Motor City who had come and slain Goliath. The finals MVP would go to Chauncey Billups, who averaged 21 points, 5 rebounds, and 3 assists throughout the series. This would also be Larry Brown's first ever championship as a professional head coach. However, there is still some questions about the series, more specifically, how the Pistons did it, how they created the defensive game plan, and shut down one of the greatest players in NBA history. Well, the answer was quite simple, and it had to do with Kobe himself. The Pistons knew that Kobe would want his shots no matter what, so their defensive plan was to just leave Shaq be for the most part, despite having to contend with Ben Wallace in the paint, but you know what I mean. Phil Jackson, of course, is not a stupid coach. He would recognize that and continue to feed Shaq and get him in the post at all times. Kobe, of course, would want his touches as well, and he would get them, the Mamba mentality and all. Even if the shots weren't open, even if there were better options out there, Kobe would still want his shots up and in. This is where the defense came in. The Pistons came ready, with two defenders uniquely built to stop Kobe, or rather not stop him, slow him down. There isn't really any stopping a player of Mr. Bryant's caliber. Their defenders were two very long, quick, and switchable guys in Rip Hamilton and Tayshaun Prince. The rotation of Hamilton and Prince hounded Kobe defensively, and shots that he would normally make, he would have a hand in his face. And simply put, they beat themselves. Well, it wasn't as simple as that, but it's a good enough metaphor for now. I am tired, and you know what I mean. That's why Kobe, throughout the entire series, shot so terribly. The Pistons knew that he would want his shots, and they knew they had the guys to make his shots a living hell. Now, of course, the series was not all on Kobe, of course not. Malone's injury, plus the relative ineffectiveness of Gary Payton, also contributed to that fact. And now, with all that said and done, let's talk about the aftermath. What happened to these two teams, and where they are, and where they went. This was the nail in the coffin for the Lakers dynasty of that era. Shaq would be traded to Miami, Phil Jackson would retire, Karl Malone would retire, and Gary Payton would be traded to Boston. The only one left standing was Kobe, who would indeed sign an extension with the team. However, in the following season, they would only win 34 games and miss the playoffs. 2 years after that, Phil Jackson would come back to coach the team, even with the book The Last Season, A Team in Search for Its Soul, coming out. The book explained the events of the last years of that Lakers team, and the book was very critical of the entire culture, especially Kobe. However, that hatchet would be buried, and in 2008, the Lakers would make the finals and lose to the Boston Celtics. However, they would make the finals again in the following year, winning in 2009 and 2010. In the following season, there would be no hangover for the reigning champion Pistons. Ben Wallace would win his third DPOY, and the Pistons would win 54 games once again, and once again make the finals out of the East. However, they would lose to Tim Duncan and the San Antonio Spurs, in a thrilling back-and-forth 7-game series that ended with Tim Duncan having one of the greatest finals performances all time in Game 7, being robbed of a quadruple-double by 2 blocks that were credited to David Robinson. After those 2 years, the Pistons would go on to make 4 more Eastern Conference Finals, 6 in a row in total. The core of Chauncey Billups, Rip Hamilton, Rasheed Wallace, and Ben Wallace was always good, but never good enough to get over that hump again. The Pistons would never see that same success, and their core would break up and scatter to the winds. However, that team still has a lot of love in the Motor City. Ben Wallace's number 3 is retired by the team. Same with Chauncey Billups' number 1. And despite the fact that Rip Hamilton and Tayshaun Prince's jerseys are not retired, there is a lot of fan clamor to get their names up in the rafters. This championship, I feel, has been one of the most underrated stories throughout NBA history, for the simple fact, it wasn't even close. It's not that David beat Goliath, it's that David pinned Goliath down and beat him into submission without even it being close to a fight. I'm exaggerating, of course, the series was very close in several games, but you get my gist. And another reason I feel it's so underrated is that the players that made up this championship roster are mostly very humble about it. Unlike some other teams that have only won one championship, 08 Celtics, they don't talk about it that much. Not in a bragging sense, not in a gloating sense, which this is a championship I definitely feel was more impressive than the 08 Celtics one. This team was not favored at all. Not favored coming out of the regular season, being only a 3rd seed, and they were not favored in the finals, where they then swept one of the greatest teams in NBA history. That title is debatable, but a team with 2 of the greatest players in NBA history, surely, yeah, you have to say that. You have to give them that. But some performances do not deserve to get lost to history, and this is one of them. And I just say to that 04 Piston squad out there, God bless you for creating one of the greatest stories in modern NBA history. I'd like to thank you all for watching, and I am about to food coma the hell out of myself because it's Thanksgiving. I am going to try my best to upload more consistently. It should be a lot easier now that the schedule at work isn't so crazy. And yeah, that's about that. I'll make a video on something at some point. And for now, deuces.